Welcome. Once again, let me welcome you to Story Church. My name is Jeremy, and for the next few minutes, I'll be able to kind of just share with you a few of the things that God has been putting on my heart this week to share with you. But I first had the privilege this week to go to Florida for a couple days, which is always awesome. And my wife and I were down there with about 2,000 of our closest friends at a conference that is just for people that are planting churches and starting churches and doing that kind of thing. And so Story Church, some of you might know, is a part of an organization called the ARC, the Association of Related Churches. And so this is the national sort of annual ARC conference that we got to go to. And it was just a ton of fun. It was really, really cool. And one of the things that ARC is trying to do is they want to try and start 2,000 churches by the year 2020 in different cities around our country and even around the world. There were representatives there from ARC Ireland, right? And Alistair. I said, Alistair, you got to know these people. And then they're starting some churches in China. They're doing things all over the place. But we are one of the first about 100 or so churches that got started, 100 to 150, somewhere in that range. And they are now up to over 400. And every year it's getting exponentially more. So it used to be they were starting 5 or 6 a year, and then 15, and then 30, and now they're up to about 50 or more a year. And so it's right at that tipping point where it's about to just go crazy. They have hundreds of churches sort of waiting to be started. And there's this awesome goal to reach 2,000 churches, start 2,000 churches just like this one in different places around the world. And so it's just a really, really cool thing to be a part of. But here's the thing that I got to hear from some of the greatest communicators this week. And I am just super encouraged today. I came away with basically two things. One was just a reminder of why we started Story Church, why we're doing this. And we talk about all the time as a church, our goal is to help people embrace the story they're meant to live. In other words, we want to help people who have no relationship with God or don't know anything about God or think church is weird or whatever, and to try and connect people with Jesus and try and strip away everything else that might get in the way. Many of us have had church experience or faith experience that had lots of layers and lots of things in the way between them and a relationship with Jesus. And we said we just want to cut through all that and try and make it as simple and easy for people as possible. And so I just reminded of that, being around all these people who had just started churches like last week or last month, and it's just encouraging to be around those people. But the other thing it did was it just inspired me thinking forward. And I just got to tell you, I have just this renewed sense after this week of the steps that it's going to take for us to do the things God has called us to do. And there's going to be some steps of faith for us. And it's going to be some moments of us standing on an edge and not knowing exactly where the landing is and going for it anyway. Because I just believe there's some dreams that God has begun to put in my heart once again for things that we want to do in our city. And I am just thrilled about that. And I'm so excited, but it's going to take some faith. It's going to take some steps, and I don't have all the details yet or exactly what that's going to look like. But I just want you to know that we aren't done. Like this isn't it. Like this isn't the dream right here to say, okay, well, this is it. Let's just be a church like this now. We believe there are hundreds and thousands of people in our city that need the hope of Jesus, and we're going to keep pushing. We're going to keep going after that. So I just am super encouraged and excited, and I hope you are too. And I just think the days and weeks ahead are going to be full of life for us. Let me do this. I want to pray because we're going to jump into part 3 of a series that we started called Greatest Hits. And we're going to begin to talk through the third part of this psalm that we've been dissecting and just kind of go through that. So let me pray for us and let me ask God to speak. God, would you just fill this place today? And would you come in here and would you just, God, give each one of us today a word, something specific for us that we would walk away with here, God, just feeling like we have met with you today, that you have had something to say to us. And so, God, we open our hearts, we open our minds to hear from you, and we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, how many of you look at your past at some point in your past and you say, okay, there was a major mistake that I made somewhere in my past. You've made, okay, we've all blown it, right? Let's just talk about one area. Fashion, okay? Every one of us, if you look back at pictures at some place in your life, you're hoping you were the only person on earth that has a copy of that photo, right? Like you are hoping, because you're looking back and you're going, who told me that was cool? Like, where did I learn that? Now, come on guys, let's be honest. How many of you rocked a mullet at some point in your past? You are liars. Come on. You are liars. All right. Okay. How many of you ladies, you had big hair? You did something like that. Okay. Yeah. Now there were things that you wore, right? That you're like, what is going on there? And you're thinking back at things, and you're seeing pictures, and you're like, wow, how could I have been so foolish? Like, where was that? And I'm telling you, if you're in this room today and you're under 18, your day's coming, all right? What you're wearing right now is what we're all regretting wearing like 20 years ago, okay? So it just cycles through, and what you think is cool now, we already learned 20 years ago, it wasn't cool, and it's still not cool, and you'll learn that 20 years from now, and then your kids will do it too, but it all happens, and we look back at our past, and we look at these things, and we say, man, I was so foolish. But of course, in our life, there are bigger things than fashion. There are decisions that we've made. There are steps we've taken in our life. There's relationships that we had. There's relationships that fell apart. There's all kinds of things that we can look back on our past and go, man, I blew it. I messed up. Like, I made a major mistake at some point in my life, and maybe you're living in the results of that right now. And that's where we're going today. We want to talk through that because we've been going through this Psalm chapter 107. It's a song that was written down in the Bible. And it was written in 4 stanzas, like 4 verses to the song. And each part of the song tells a different story. And it tells a common story, a story that many of us have experienced in our lives. But the psalm starts with this. It starts in verses 1 to 3, and it says, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever." And then this is the key verse. "Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. Those he redeemed from the hand of the foe, those he gathered from the lands, from east and west, from north and south." And so this whole series has been based on this idea that let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. If God has done something cool in your heart, if he's done something cool in your life, if there has been a thing that he brought you through in your past, then this psalm encourages us, tell the story. Like, let people know. Let people know what God has done. Sing it out, right? Like, proclaim it. Let people know, hey man, I was here and this thing happened, and then God rescued, he redeemed, he did something awesome, and now here I am today. And so we've been encouraging you to share those stories as much as possible throughout this series. And so each verse, we said, tells a different story. The first week we met a guy who was a wanderer. And it started out with this sort of verse 1 of the song is about this guy. It says, some were wanderers. And they wandered through life, and they're going and they're hungry and they're thirsty, and it was described as a desert. And it said, they're longing and they're searching for something that would satisfy. And there's this sense they have no purpose, no direction. They're just meandering through life and trying to figure it out. And then they finally cry out to God, and then God comes and it says he leads them on a straight way. He leads them out of the desert and into the city. And it maybe, if you're here today and that's you, then maybe your thing today is simply to cry out to God and let him lead you out of the desert. Let him lead you on a straight way. And then last week we talked about sort of the second verse of the song, which is about someone who finds themselves in darkness. And the darkness sort of represented this idea of being alone, being scared, feeling like all hope is lost. And what had often happened for the person who found themselves in darkness was that they chose to make decisions that they knew would take them away from the path of God. And they decided anyway to go that direction, and they didn't want to be near God. And then they find themselves alone. And exactly what they wanted, right? But it's not a good place. It's a dark place. And so they cry out to God, and it says that God brings them out of the darkness and into the light. He begins to come to where they are and gathers them up and carries them out to the light. And so maybe today you find yourself in darkness. And my encouragement to you is simply cry out to him and allow the light to come in. Invite it. And then today we're going to go to this third part. And we said that each one sort of represents a geographical location in the mind of Israel. The wanderer was to the east because that's the desert. That's where the desert experience was. And the west for Israel is where the sun set. And the sun is, when it goes down, it's the place of darkness. It's where darkness comes from. Today, we're talking about the north of Israel. And for Israel, and the mindset of Israel, to the north of Israel is where all their regrets live. All their shame and their pain has experienced, that they experience as a people comes to them from the north. As you read the history of Israel throughout the Old Testament, often the nations that conquer Israel or that carry them off into exile come from the north. It's from the north where a lot of the judgment comes against them. It's also the place, the north was where they began to learn from the north about different gods and about idols, and they would start to worship idols, and they were sort of symbolically from the north, that they would begin to kind of carry these things into their own culture. In fact, the word north that we see here is the same word for a specific mountain that existed in this area that actually was the place of worship of Baal, which is a god that they would worship. So the very word of north represents this place of idol worship, and it's a place they look at when, in an honest moment, they look at toward the north as a place of regret, a place of, man, I made mistakes, I blew it, I was foolish. And so here's how it goes. This is how the story begins. So we've had the wanderers, we've had those in darkness, and today we have fools. Here's what it says: some became fools through their rebellious ways, and they suffered affliction because of their iniquities. They loathed all food, and they drew near the gates of death. The picture of this person who starts in this particular part of the song is someone who says, man, I became a fool. Like, I blew it. I made such a foolish mistake. I did something so dumb. And they're looking toward this part of their life, and they're looking at this, and they're saying, I made a mistake. There is a thing in my past, there's a part of my life that I'm not proud of, that I made some serious mistakes. And so they're calling themselves, it's almost like on themselves they're saying, we were foolish. We blew it. We totally made these dumb mistakes. And it says that they suffered affliction because of this. They're in suffering. They're in a position where they're struggling because of what they have done, because of these decisions that they've made. Now, one person even says that you could translate this, instead of suffering affliction, that they afflicted themselves. It's this sort of like they did it to themselves kind of idea, that they put it on themselves. But it's not only that the decision that they made was against themselves, but there's this sense in which for these people that they are even before it's going to tell us in a second that they're crying out to God, even in this place they're sort of repenting. They're just feeling like, man, I blew it. They're owning it, right? They're just saying, we became fools. We did something that we shouldn't have done. And so one guy even suggests that this they afflicted themselves and then they loathed all food is this picture of them in fasting, that they actually put themselves in a position of fasting because they realized how bad they have done. They're like, we blew it. And they're in this place of sort of mourning and fasting and just like full of shame and regret and all this stuff, all the way to the point it says that they feel like they're drawing near the gates of death. They're like so low. They're so down because of these regrets. They're so like just beside themselves with regret over all that they have done. They feel foolish and ashamed. And my guess is some of you in this room, like you know that. Like you've been there. You've experienced that. Maybe you're experiencing that right now, that you're in a place where you're living with sort of the results of decisions that you made. And you're sitting here today going, man, I get this story. Like I feel this story because I live with this. I live with these regrets. I live with this sort of, these mistakes that I've made. And I'm in a place where, man, it feels sometimes like I'm drawing near the gates of death myself. Like I just feel horrible about this thing that I've done. I feel so much pain as a result. And some of you are forced to deal with the consequences of choices that you made. And there are things that aren't going to go away. And there are things that you have to just kind of deal with and you have to walk through. And you're feeling that right now. what I want to talk about today is like, where do we go from there? Where do we go from this place of pain, this place of regret and feeling like we made mistakes, and how do we get beyond that? And I was reading actually this week, I was reading this blog, and just a line that stood out to me that I just thought was so important. It says that pain is always an invitation to grow. Pain is always an invitation to grow. And I just thought, man, that is so true. That's exactly where we're going this morning, because what happens is when you and I experience pain, we have like a choice to make in that moment. We can either sort of, like a lot of us do, maybe just try and cover over that pain and try and somehow ignore the pain or pretend it's not there, or we self-medicate the pain, or we try and distract ourselves from the pain, or we do something else, or we can sort of own it and go, okay, I'm in pain. And part of this might be my fault even. And there are some things that have happened here. And what we can do as a result of that is we can decide to do something different. We can decide to live differently. We can grow as a result. And I was thinking about this, and what happens, is that often we feel pain, or we go through difficult times. And if we don't grow from it, then it's just like, what good is it? It's just pain for pain's sake. So imagine that you want to, get in shape or something, and so you start waking up really early every morning, and you go to the gym, and you're working hard, and you're sweating like crazy. But imagine if you did all of that work and nothing changed. Wouldn't you just be like, what am I doing? Like, I'm killing myself, and I'm not getting any gain at all. Why would I go through pain like this? Why would I do that to myself if it's not going to benefit me? Or maybe it's a diet thing. It's like I'm not going to eat good stuff, and I'm going to eat nothing but kale smoothies, right? All day long. I mean, that sounds like horrible to me, right? But maybe some of you are like, ooh, I think I'll try that. But not me. But so that is a horrible place to live. So imagine you say no to everything that tastes good and yes to only kale smoothies, but nothing changes in your life. Well, why go through the pain if it's not going to give you any gain, right? And the same is true when you go through these painful situations in life and you experience pain as a result of foolish mistakes or whatever. If you're not willing to grow from it, then all you're doing is experiencing the pain and you're not getting any gain from it. It reminds me, some of you know I've been coaching baseball at Southern High School, and pain is a good word. Pain is a good word right now. We're struggling, okay? We're struggling over there, and it's difficult. And this week, after another heartbreaking 10-0 loss, we just like the guys are just dejected, and we're standing around after the game, and it's like, what do you say after like multiple games that end in this way? How do you kind of be like, we'll get them next time, because it's probably not true. Like what do you do? Like, how do you help someone in that process? And so, we were hanging out, and what often happens is that we're like, man, we didn't do this right, and we didn't do this right, and and it just becomes sort of this, it just gains momentum of negativity over and over. And so I kind of, each coach sort of says a little something after the game. And so I just thought, we need to figure out how to get past this. We got to turn the page somehow. So one of the things that we talked about this week was just this idea of guys, I just said it. This was ugly. This was painful, right? To go through this hurts. This is not fun. None of us is having fun in this moment. But here's the deal. If we leave the field and we simply just block it out of our minds and forget it, and we just move on to the next game, guess what? Same result, right? It's just going to keep happening. But if we will sort of embrace the pain of the 10-0 loss again, and we go, okay, what could I learn from this? What could I do differently next time? How do I act differently so that it doesn't happen again? Then the painful experience of a butt kicking, right, becomes a thing of growth. It actually becomes a redemptive moment. There's this thing within the pain that it actually gets redeemed and turned into something positive. It's not just a horrible moment, a horrible 2 hours of our lives. It's the 2 hours that changed something, that made the next game better. It made something else possible. And so for you and I, when we go through these painful moments, we've got to remember that we've got to sort of grab onto that and figure out what needs to change. How do we become different? I've been reading this book called Be Real by a pastor named Rick Bizet. And this is one of the things he says in there. I just love this. He says, a real change usually happens as a result of an uncomfortable, even painful situation. One that causes you to get real before God because nothing else will. We don't change when we see the light. We change when we feel the heat. I thought, man, that is so true, right? You and I could be doing something dumb and we can look over there and go, now that's the right way to do it. But we're not going to go do that unless this part right here becomes painful. Unless this in this moment somehow becomes difficult and actually sometimes, pain. I mean, that's the best word for it. We don't just go, wow, that's a better way to do it. We are comfortable people. We like our bad ways of doing it as long as it's not hurting me, right? But as soon as it hurts me, as soon as it's painful, that's the only thing that gets us to change. That's the only thing that moves us to a different place. So the story goes on. It starts in this place of pain. It starts in this place of frustration and foolishness, and then it moves on, and it says in verse 19, then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them from their distress. He sent out his word and healed them, and he rescued them from the grave. So they are in a place of total regret and shame and feeling like they made major mistakes. It says that all the way to the point where they feel like they're nearing death. And this passage says, then they cry out to God, and he rescues them. He heals them. There's this sense of which when we're hurting that there's like something that needs to be fixed. And so we cry out and God heals, and then it says that he rescues them from the grave. He actually pulls them from the place where they feel like they could never get past this. Like that is like, it's just, there's death. There's this sense of finality, it feels like, because of their mistake, because of the thing that they did wrong or the thing that they regret. They feel like, I'll never overcome this. I'll never get past this. I'll never be able to defeat this part of my life. It's just always going to be there. And yet they cry out to God, and it says that God rescues them from the grave. He reaches right into death itself, and he pulls them up onto their feet. And he says, no, this isn't final. This isn't over. This isn't the place where it all ends. This is simply a new start. It's a place to go from death back to life. And so when we cry out to God, he does this even in your worst mistake, even in your worst moment, no matter how messed up you feel like you are, God is able to reach all the way into the grave and pull you back up and set you back on your feet. No matter how far you think you've gone, God can still turn your life around. This is what he does. He reaches into death itself and he sets you back on your feet and says, no, let's learn from this. Let's move forward. Let's do something different. And as a result, the passage goes on in verse 21. It says, let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind. Let them sacrifice thank offerings and tell of his works with songs of joy. Imagine, or maybe you've been there, you don't have to imagine, but imagine being in such a place of darkness and just despair that you feel like you're all the way to the point of death. Like, I'll never overcome this. I'll never get past this. But then God does something that you never saw coming. And he sets you on your feet, and he gives you new life, and he gives you a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance. And suddenly you find yourself in a whole new place that you never thought was possible. Wouldn't that make you want to tell someone? Wouldn't that make you want to sing it out and go, I thought I was toast. And then God brought me back and he put me on my feet and he moved me forward. This is what it says. It says, let them tell of his works with songs of joy. Just like the beginning of the chapter says, let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. If you've been in a place where you've overcome a mistake in your life that you thought was it, you thought it was final, and somehow God rescued you and redeemed you and healed you and brought you back from a place that you thought was death, and he set you on your feet, I mean, that's worth telling. That's a story that needs to be told. Somebody needs to hear that story. Because there's somebody else who's in that point. There's somebody else who's sitting in that moment feeling like there's no chance. And when they hear your story, it gives them a little bit of hope. It lifts their head up far enough to go, wait a minute, really? God did that for you? Well, maybe he could do that for me. And this is why it's so important that we share our stories. But I love how this part ends because it says, let them sacrifice thank offerings. Now, these are specific kinds of offerings. In the Old Testament, all throughout the passage, the law, there were all these different offerings that the people had to give. And there were guilt offerings that they offered for their mistakes, the things that they did wrong, their sins, whatever word you want to use. They would offer a guilt offering. And the guilt offering was some sort of a sacrifice that actually took the place of themselves for their sin. It was an atonement. It was like, I deserve the punishment, but instead I'm going to offer this guilt offering, and this thing will take the punishment instead. But a thanks offering is different. A thanks offering is offered after the guilt offering because the thanks offering celebrates the fact that I am at peace with God. That me and God are okay. Like there's not a deficit. I don't have to offer a guilt offering because that's already been offered. And I am offering now a thanks offering. And it becomes a celebration of the fact that sin or that brokenness or that mistakes that I've made have already been forgiven. So this isn't you and me offering a guilt offering, God, please forgive me. It's us offering a thanks offering. It's called a todah, a thanks offering that says, God, thank you that you've already forgiven me. Thank you that I'm already in a place of peace with you. There's no deficit. There's nothing that I have to make up. And so what ends up happening, if you actually look at this passage, this little part that we just read, they start off, what does it say? Loathing all food. That they're in this place of probably intentional starvation, of fasting and just too sad and too broken and too messed up by their mistakes, to a todah, which is a thanks offering. It came with a celebration and a feast. And so these people go from fasting to feasting within the span of 4 or 5 verses that we just read. Because of what God does, when they cry out to God, they literally go from death and fasting to life and feasting. And I remember I was thinking about when I was a youth pastor in California for a lot of years, and we would do this event every year called the 30-hour famine. And 30-hour famine was in partnership with World Vision. And so what we would do is we would get a bunch of kids in the room and we would not feed them for 30 hours. They were supposed to fast for 30 hours and raise money for kids around the world who were really hungry, who don't get meals regularly. And so it was always a lot of fun, and we'd bring them in and we would play games and do a lot of cool things, and we'd always have to confiscate emergency food from their bags and all kinds of things that they thought they were sneaking in, and so they would fast for these 30 hours. Now, if you've ever tried this, honestly, right when you think you're going to be hungry, you go to sleep and you sleep most of the night, and so it's really not even a big deal to go this long. But they do it, and so they're hungry, of course. But when we would get to the end of this event, we would all eat together. We would go to a pizza buffet or something like that, and they would just go nuts. They would go crazy. Like I would see like 6th grade girls that were like this big put away like 2.5 pizzas. They would just just go crazy, and it was intense. And they would literally go from one moment of fasting and hunger and feeling like I'm going to die to just like, I cannot believe how much food you just ate. Like that is amazing. They would go from this fasting to this feasting, like in a moment. And this is sort of the picture of what God does for us when we're in that broken place, in that place of, man, I have made the mistake of my life. I have blown it. I've become a fool. I've done something I completely regret and I'm ashamed of. And we cry out to God, and it says that God pulls us out of the grave. He pulls us back to life, and he sets us up to feast, not to fast. He sets us up to party and to celebrate the fact that he has already rescued us. So here's what I want to do. I just want to give you 4 quick ideas, and I promise they're very quick, about just how do we go from a place of pain How do we sort of grow through those painful moments? What do we need to do to make sure that pain isn't just pain, but that pain becomes a greatest hit story of, yeah, it was painful, but man, this is what I learned during that time. This is how I grew. This is how I was changed during that time. So here you go. Number one is this. You just got to accept it. The first thing you got to do is when the pain comes, when you find yourself in that painful place, you find yourself in that place of regret, in that place of man, I blew it. Don't run from it. Don't hide it. Don't try and justify it. Don't try and cover it up. Don't try and ignore it's not there. Just own it. Accept it. Man, this hurts. Like, I was foolish. I made a mistake, and I'm in a place of pain. And for some of you, you need to just say that out loud. You need to say it to God. You need to say, God, I have blown it. I'm in a place of pain right now. God, this hurts. God, I know like this was probably my fault or whatever, but this hurts. I'm in a place of pain. And for some of you, I think it would be beneficial for you even to sort of accept it and have that conversation with somebody, with another person. To say, man, I blew it. And this is where I think, our Catholic brothers and sisters like that, I think there's such a benefit to this sort of regular confession of saying, man, here's the ways that I'm kind of falling short. And I think there's so many good things that can come from you and a friend that are really close and really connected to just be able to honestly share with each other and say, man, here's what I'm going through. And I blew it the other day, and I made this mistake, and this is where I'm at. And so accepting it is so important to start. But then the second thing is this. You got to take inventory. And what I mean by that is you got to sort of figure out where you're at, and you got to ask some questions. And sometimes these are difficult questions. Sometimes it's just being reflective and going, okay, I'm experiencing pain right now. Where did this come from? Like, what did I do that might have brought this about? Like, is the pain I'm experiencing in this moment because of a decision I made? Is this thing that I'm experiencing, what part have I played in this? Some of you might be experiencing relational pain, and there's something that happened in a relationship that man, it's time to just go, man, I play some role in this. I did something. This is partly me in this thing. And just kind of asking the questions and sort of pointing that out. Maybe you're having financial pain. And maybe for some of you, there's something in your life you go, man, probably should have paid that bill instead of, getting a fourth TV for the house. And you're going, man, that was a dumb mistake. I made a mistake, And so you have to sort of, what did I do that caused this? Where am I at in this? But even a deeper question or one that you go even deeper on this thing is, what is this pain teaching me? What am I learning as a result? What is the thing that I'm supposed to get from this? Is there some lesson that I really need to make sure that I learn because I don't want to go through this again? And really just making sure that you've thought all of that through. And then the third thing is this, that you've got to make a change. And this is hard because a lot of times you will accept it even, we might even ask the questions, but then are you willing to make the change? Are you willing to act differently or do the thing differently? So for some of you, it's a behavior that needs to change. Some of you, it's an attitude that needs to change. Some of you, there's a relationship in your life that's just not healthy and you know it, and it's continuing down a bad path. And if that's a friendship or maybe it's a work relationship, you can try and fix that, but there might be a point at some point where you go, man, this relationship is taking me in a different direction. And I may have to part ways with this particular relationship. I may have to figure a different way forward. And for some of you, this is within your marriage. You're going, man, we're struggling. We're not making it, and we're dying over here. This isn't working. And I think this is where it's so important that you and I, we're able to own that and admit that. We're able to take inventory and instead of pointing fingers and going, it's because they, going, man, what did I have failed in this way. I have messed up in this way. And then being able to have the courage to make the change and to say, you know what? I've got to do something differently. And I'm not talking about swapping out one marriage for something else. I'm talking about within your marriage, how do you start to change? How do you start to act differently and do something different? Because I think what's often the case is a lot of people sort of treat their marriage as it's like gardening, but it's poor gardening. It's, hey, there's a weed, let's just cut it and we'll get rid of this thing. And everything looks nice now. And they sort of move on from the marriage, or they ignore that part or whatever, but the root is still there. And they may even move on to another relationship, but the root is still there, and it's still going to come out. It's still going to be there. And so for you and I, having the courage to go, I've got to root that thing out. I've got to find the thing that is causing this deeper. I got to get away from the surface level of the toothpaste and the whatever. I got to get to the issue. Like, what is the root cause? And begin to change that and deal with that sort of thing. And then fourthly is this, and this may sound strange, but give thanks for it. Give thanks for it. You and I experience pain all the time, but when's the last time you looked at a point of your past and where you experienced pain and you said, God, thank you. Thank you for that moment in my life, that pain that brought me to this point today. Like, I'm different because of that. Doesn't mean I want to go back to it. Doesn't mean I want to relive it. You know, I always hear people go, I wouldn't change a thing. Well, I'd probably change some things. Like, that hurt, right? Like, I don't want to go back to that, but thank you, God. Thank you that you were with me, that I survived, that I'm here today, and I'm different. I have a different outlook on life. I've been able to help people in similar situations, whatever the case is, but you're able to thank God, even for the pain, even for the difficult things that you and I have gone through. It's so important that we get to that, because that's when we know we've gone full circle. We've gone from pain to now we realize there's progress and there's hope and there's this, I have grown as a result. I can stand here today in this moment and I can look back into my past and I can see pain, but I go, thank you, God, for that, because of what you taught me and because of where I am today as a result. And guys, those stories, when you're able to look back in your past and go, man, I lived through something. I made it through something. And I'm here today and I realize, man, I was a fool and I did something I shouldn't have done, but God pulled me from the grave and I'm here today as a result. I mean, that's a story you've got to share. That's a story that we need to hear. That's a story that someone in this room, you've got the story and there's someone sitting across from me on the other side of the room that they're in the middle of it right now. And if they could hear your story, it would change everything for them. And this takes courage and it's really difficult, but for you and I to become storytellers, to become people who will take those broken, difficult moments of our life that we sort of sometimes wish would stay in the past and we could just forget them. But to be able to go back there and take it with us, not all the difficulty and the pain and the baggage of it, but to take the good stuff away and to say, let me tell you what God did for me when I was in a similar place. I mean, that, guys, that is the hope for people that keeps them going. That's something that invites someone to say, you know what, I'm in it right now, but this person tells me that there is hope on the other side, and I believe them because they've been through it. That is totally different than someone like me standing up front going, oh, don't worry, it'll be great. Like, if you've been through it and you can share that with somebody, I mean, that means everything to them. And you've all got stories. You've got things in you that God has done. You've got things that you've come through, things that you've experienced and things that have changed you. And I'm just telling you, you've got to find a way to share those stories. That's why for us as a church, we created this website at storychurch.org/mystory. And it's just an encouragement for you, a way for you to begin to share those stories. Because, guys, we need to hear them. We need to know what God has done in your life. The band's going to come out, and they're going to lead us. And I just want to encourage you, because I just think some of you today are probably in this place right now where you're in the midst of pain. You're in the midst of, you're dealing with something, you're living with something that, you know, in an honest moment, you're going, I probably had some hand in this. I probably did something. I've made a mistake. I've done something. And I'm living with some of the consequences of that right now. And I just want to encourage you that our God is the one who reaches all the way into the grave and he lifts people out. I don't care how far you feel from God or how messed up you think you are or how final that thing feels that you've done. God takes dead things and he brings them back to life. This is what we celebrate in Easter as we're coming up to that. It's one of the reasons we've asked you with these cards that we've put on your chairs to take those things home and invite people and bring them, because there are people experiencing living death like they're in the midst of it. And God is a God who wants to take people from the grave and put them back on their feet. And as Jesus came from death to life, so we can too. And I want to encourage you today, you've got to find a way to embrace that and to cry out to him in the midst of that. And if you'll do that, I believe he will heal you. I believe he will come into your heart and he will heal your brokenness. He will put the pieces back together. He will set you back on your feet. And he will take you from a place of death to a place of life.